Good morning. The Office for National Statistics has today confirmed that Britain has fallen into recession. And we now know that GDP per capita fell in every quarter of the last year. Let me start by saying that this is deeply worrying news for families struggling to make ends meet and for businesses too. These are provisional figures. They may change, but it is absolutely clear that Britain remains trapped in a spiral of economic decline. This isn't a question of lines on a graph. It's about the health of our high streets, about growing businesses, secure, well-paid jobs, and money in the pockets of working people. The British people did not need to see these figures today to tell them that the economy is not working, that we are in the midst of a cost of living crisis, and that they are worse off. But these numbers shine a spotlight on the scale of that failure. The confirmation of recession exposes a government and a Prime Minister completely out of touch with the realities on the ground. A government that for too long has looked on economic failure with complacency, content to be the managers of decline. Rishi Sunak claims that he has a plan, but the plan is not working. He claims that the economy has turned a corner, but the economy is shrinking. He claims he doesn't want to take us back to square one, but we are going backwards. The Prime Minister's claims are in tatters. The cornerstone of his leadership has been shattered. The promise to grow the economy has been broken. Our economy is now smaller than when Rishi Sunak entered 10 Downing Street in 2022. Having spent years in the slow lane, Rishi Sunak has now put our economy into reverse. This is Rishi's recession, and it is the British people who will pay the price. This is simply the latest chapter in a long story of economic failure and stagnation, a story that reaches back more than a decade, felt in stagnant household incomes, in the decay of our high streets, and in creeping insecurity. I often think of a young family I met in Worthing almost 2 years ago now. A mum and a dad, working 5 jobs between them, struggling to make ends meet, constantly juggling work and childcare. As a family, they only get half a day a week together. They felt that any hope of buying a home of their own had evaporated. Good people, working hard. And do you know what the mum said to me? She said, "You just wonder if you're doing something wrong." Well, something has gone profoundly wrong, because an economy that isn't working for working people isn't working at all. It is time that the Conservative Party took some responsibility. The origins of many of the crises that we have faced are global: pandemic, war, energy crisis. But their consequences have been exacerbated by the choices of Conservative governments. Each time crisis has hit, Britain has been acutely exposed. First, austerity that choked off investment. Next, years of political instability which has fueled economic instability. Brexit without a plan. The Conservatives' mini-budget sending mortgages and interest rates soaring. 5 Prime Ministers. 7 Chancellors. 11 plans for growth, each yielding less than the last. If the UK economy had grown at the average rate of other OECD economies over the past decade, it would now be £140 billion larger, equivalent to £5,000 per household every year. That would also mean an additional £50 billion in tax revenues to invest in our crumbling public services. Today, the average British family is 20% worse off than their German counterparts. 1 in 3 working-age families have less than £1,000 in savings. And the typical family renewing their mortgage this year will find themselves paying an additional £240 every month. Over this year and last, the fixed-rate mortgages of more than 3 million people will come to an end, all paying the price of the Tory mortgage bombshell. And there are 700,000 more people out of the workforce now than when the pandemic struck 4 years ago. The Conservative Party can't fix the problem. They are the architects of the problem. Britain needs change. Our economy needs change. Not just a change in government, a change in our economic approach, casting aside failed economic ideas in response to a new age of insecurity, to embrace a new emerging economic consensus that this Conservative government chooses to ignore. It's what I call securonomics, from instability and short-termism to a mission-based government, prioritising economic security for families and for our country, pro-worker and pro-business, in the knowledge that each depends on the success of the other. A plan based on the understanding that wealth doesn't just trickle down from the top, it comes from the bottom up and the middle out, from the talent and the effort of millions of ordinary people and businesses. The times demand resolve, discipline, and a new Britain for a renewed world, and a serious plan to back those plans up. A plan supported by British business and developed in partnership with British business. With Keir Starmer's Labour Party, this is what you will get. This is Labour's plan: stability, investment, reform. Stability brought about by iron discipline, guided by strong fiscal rules, robust economic institutions, and with every policy that we announce, every line in our manifesto, fully costed and fully funded. Investment through partnership with the private sector to steam ahead in the industries of the future, with a modern industrial strategy and a new national wealth fund to invest alongside business in our automotive sector, in our ports, and in the future of our steel industry. And with a new national champion in homegrown power, Great British Energy, leading the way on floating offshore wind, tidal and nuclear power, to ignite growth, boost our economic security, drive down bills, and create good, well-paid jobs in all parts of Britain. And reform, starting with our planning system, taking on vested interests to get Britain building again, supporting working people to develop the skills to thrive in the changing world of work, to make work pay with a genuine living wage and a new deal for working people, to cut the NHS backlog and get people back to work. Stability, investment, reform. The foundations of a plan to break free of the Tories' vicious cycle of stagnant growth, rising taxes and falling living standards. To repair our economic security. I am under no illusion about the scale of the challenge that we may inherit. There are no shortcuts, no quick fixes, no easy answers. There are hard choices ahead. We will not shrink from those choices, nor the hard work required for a decade of national renewal. Labour will fight the next election on the economy. Every day we will expose what the Conservatives have done to our country. Because the questions that people will ask ahead of the next election are simple. Do you and your family feel better off after 14 years of Conservative government? Do our hospitals, our schools, our police work better than they did 14 years ago? Frankly, does anything in our country work better than when the Conservatives came to power 14 years ago? Here is further evidence today, in black and white. Britain has fallen into recession. It's time to turn the page on 14 years of Conservative failure. It's time to demand better than managed decline. It's time to start a new chapter for Britain. Thank you very much. I'll take some questions now, and I'll start with Faisal Islam from the BBC.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Shadow Chancellor. Do you recognise in any way that in these numbers, yes, it's a recession, but it's a relatively mild recession given the context of, say, the pandemic or the great financial crisis, and it's the first time we've got to speak to you since the abandonment of your own plan, the 28 billion last year. Can you just clarify, the point about that plan, as I understood it, was that this was your plan for growth, and that now you're not doing it. Where is your plan for growth? You're saying you can't afford it, but where's the growth going to come from?
Well, first of all, the definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. The economy contracted by 0.1% in Q3 and by 0.3% in Q4. These were worse numbers than economists had been predicting. This is a recession. But we didn't need to get these numbers for us to know that families are struggling through an enormous cost of living crisis and businesses are struggling as well. As Stuart Rose said on the radio this morning, if it quacks like a recession, it is a recession, and this is most certainly a recession. On the Green Prosperity Plan, I set out in my speech today how the National Wealth Fund and GB Energy will drive growth in our economy, investment alongside the private sector in the industries of the future. And I think it was welcome last week that so many businesses said that what is needed to drive investment in these industries is that joint investment and reforms of the planning system, which Labour are committed to get Britain building again. I'll take a question now from Gurpreet Narwan from Sky.
Thank you very much. As Chancellor, would you not have been prepared to induce a recession to tackle inflation? And if not, how would you have dealt with the inflation crisis differently?
Well, just look at the international evidence. At the moment, the UK has the highest inflation in the G7, and only the UK and Japan, I think, are likely to have gone into recession at the end of last year. So I don't buy this argument that you need to have a recession to get inflation down. Other countries doing an awful lot better at controlling inflation whilst also managing to grow their economy, which is the point that I made about Britain being acutely exposed to the challenges that we face. I just do not accept this premise that this was what was needed to control inflation. Other countries are doing this an awful lot better than we are here in the UK. I'll take a question now from Libby Viner from ITV.
Shadow Chancellor, you've dubbed this Rishi's recession. How can you ensure that it wouldn't become Rachel's recession, should you get into power, when you have actually scaled back so significantly on your green investment plans?
Well, first of all, Rishi Sunak has been been Prime Minister now since October 2022, and in every quarter, since he's become Prime Minister, the economy is now smaller than when he came to office. And of course, one of his 5 pledges was to grow the economy. We now know he's failed to achieve this, and the economy is going backwards. This is his recession. He promised to grow the economy, and he has failed. Unlike this Prime Minister and this Chancellor, Keir Starmer and me have got a real plan, a concrete plan for growth. And don't just take our word for it, take the word of the businesses who have helped us devise these plans, whether it's reform of planning or of pensions, the National Wealth Fund and GB Energy. This is all about getting the growth in our economy that we need. The Conservatives have no plan. We have a serious plan that we've worked on with business. And the Green Prosperity Plan is still there. A National Wealth Fund to invest in carbon capture and storage, in green hydrogen, in our steel industry, in renewable-ready ports, as well as GB Energy, with an endowment to invest in nuclear, tidal and floating offshore wind. These are plans that this government don't have, that the Labour government will have to grow our economy and to secure that growth and investment that we need to turn things around after 14 years of Conservative failure. I'll take a question now from Liam Halligan from GB News.
Shadow Chancellor, what would you put in a budget on March the 6th if you were standing at that dispatch box where Jeremy Hunt will be standing?
Well, first of all, I do find it extraordinary that the actual Chancellor of the Exchequer is providing a running commentary on his own budget. Now, I worked at the Bank of England for many years, and I've been in politics for a long time now. I have never seen anything like it, with a Chancellor giving a running commentary. It is dangerous and it is very misguided, and I would urge him to stop this, because it creates the uncertainty that is that we really don't need. We haven't got the numbers that the Chancellor has got to inform the budget process. I think that he gets his final numbers from the OBR yesterday or today on the outlook for the economy and for public finances. But I've made no secret of the fact that I want taxes on working people to be lower, but I've also been really clear, including in the speech today, that I will never make a promise where I can't say where the money is going to come from. So I can't make those promises. One thing that I would do, though, and this is a plan that we've already set out, is to get going with our plan for growth, to grow the economy, to create those jobs and those investments with the National Wealth Fund and GB Energy and those planning reforms, because in the end, the biggest challenge that the UK economy faces is that lack of growth and investment. And we can't turn anything round in our economy unless we can get that uplifting growth. And that would be my number one priority if I was Chancellor of the Exchequer. I take a question now from George Parker from the FT.
Thank you, Shadow Chancellor. You say there are some hard choices ahead. Can I ask you about one of them relating to the budget? You referred to the Chancellor and the public services and the very constrained public finances. You've criticised the government for considering maxing out the credit card on unaffordable tax cuts. You've talked about a scorched earth policy regarding the public services after the election. The question is this: if Jeremy Hunt announces tax cuts in the budget, as we think he will Labour support them?
Well, as I said in my answer to Liam's question, that depends on the state of the public finances and the projections set out by the OBR. I objected to the cuts, to the increases in national insurance when Rishi Sunak tried to increase them as Chancellor, because I thought it was wrong to increase taxes on working people in the middle of a cost of living crisis. We supported the cuts to national insurance when the government finally got around to doing that. But I will never make any commitments either around spending increases or tax cuts without being able to say where the money is going to come from. I take a question now from Ryan Saby from The Sun.
Shadow Chancellor, you continually talk about boosting economic growth, but how will you do that with the boost productivity among the economically inactive? 9 million people aged 16 to 64 not in work or not looking for work. How will you look at trying to boost productivity there?
Yeah, this is absolutely a huge challenge in our economy. And we are an outlier amongst other countries around the world in failing to get people back to work since the pandemic. As I said in my speech just this morning, there are now 700,000 more people who are economically inactive compared to 4 years ago as we went into the pandemic restrictions. And the government needs to take some responsibility for that. We've got, I think, a waiting list for our NHS of 7.8 million today. Many of those people, their lives are on hold and they're not able to work because they are waiting for hospital appointments, operations and procedures. We've got to tackle that backlog and that waiting list. That's why I've said that if you make Britain your home, you should pay your taxes here, and under Labour you will. We will get rid of the non-dom tax status and create an additional 2 million appointments every year in our NHS to ensure that we clear that backlog and get people back to work. That is just part of our plan to do exactly what you say and ensure that everyone who can work is working. I'll take a question now from Larry Elliott from The Guardian.
It's really just to sketch out a bit more what your plan for growth actually involves, because it doesn't really seem to involve that much different from what the current government's plan for growth is. What specifically would you be doing that's different from what we've seen over the last 18 months, where presumably you would have supported the increases in interest rates to deal with inflation and accept that the government couldn't really do very much about higher energy bills? So, I mean, what really would the difference be with a Labour government as opposed to what we've seen over the last 18 months, 2 years?
I reject entirely that there's little difference between what Labour and the Conservatives offer. We've got a comprehensive plan for growth that has been drawn up with business. Let me just give you a few examples of that. Labour would reform the planning system to get Britain building again. There are, at the moment, something like £200 billion worth of projects waiting for connections to our grid system, but they're being held back by restrictions in the planning rules. At the moment, it takes something like 2 years to build a wind farm, but you can take 13 years to get a connection to the grid because of bureaucracies in the system. We need to turn that around so that we get Britain building again and ensure that that crucial national infrastructure is coming online, and we are determined to do that, and we set out those plans at conference last year. The National Wealth Fund, with £7.3 billion endowment, and the Great British Energy, endowed with just over £8 billion, will invest in some of the jobs and the industries of the future, from green steel to hydrogen to carbon capture and storage, floating offshore wind, areas where Britain has got enormous potential but are being held back today by a Conservative government with no plan to realise the potential of those new industries of the future. And that's good for consumers as well, because it's lower bills, and it's good for working people because it's good jobs paying decent wages in all parts of the country, and it's good for our national security because it means we're less reliant on Putin and dictators around the world for our basic energy needs. In addition to that, we've set out reforms to the apprenticeship levy to turn it into a growth and skills levy, to help businesses to train up the next generation of workers, and a modern industrial strategy with strategies already published for life sciences, for financial services and for automotives, and more of those industrial strategies that have been worked on in conjunction with businesses are coming forward shortly. So those are just some of the areas where our plans are just so different from what the Conservatives have set out, and combined with our commitments to stability in the economic system, with the fiscal lock to ensure that the OBR can report and that our economic institutions are respected, and the fiscal rules to ensure that debt comes down as a share of GDP and that we fund day-to-day spending through tax receipts, gives the stability that businesses need to make those long-term investments. Lizzie Buckham from the Mirror.
The Chancellor's reportedly looking at a further squeeze on public spending to allow for tax cuts in the budget. What's your view on that as a trade-off, and will you commit to not imposing further cuts to public services?
Well, unlike the actual Chancellor, I don't think it is a very good idea to provide a running commentary on the budget. I do recognise that our public services are under huge pressure, unlike perhaps the Conservatives do, which is why I've said there does need to be an immediate injection of cash into our public services, which is why we would end the tax break where non-DOMs don't pay taxes in the country in which they live. It's why we would end the tax break where private schools are not paying VAT or business rates, and it's why we would change the rules about how the bonuses of private equity managers are taxed. And we would use all of that money to fund an immediate injection of cash into the public services, which are on their knees today. But then we've got to have a serious plan to grow the economy. As I set out in the speech just this morning, if our economy had have grown at the rate of other OECD countries these last 14 years, our economy would be £150 billion bigger, worth £5,000 for every family in the UK, and we would have tens of billions of pounds of additional tax receipts, which we would be able to use to invest in our public services. That's why it is so important that we grow our economy, and that's why Keir Starmer and me have put so much reference on our plans for growth, because that in the end is the way that we encourage investment in Britain, improve our public services and improve the living standards for ordinary working people. And a final question from Amy Gibbons at the Telegraph.
Thank you, Shadow Chancellor. Following the events of this week, do you think the vetting of your parliamentary candidates is strong enough? And will you tighten up the selection process in light of what happened with Azhar Ali and Graham Jones?
Well, first of all, I would say that Keir Starmer acted swiftly in response to the accusations and the stories that came out about Mr Ali and Mr Jones, and that is absolutely right. When Keir became leader, the number one thing that he said he would do would be to change the Labour Party by rooting out anti-Semitism. I only returned to the Shadow Cabinet because I was sure of Keir Starmer's commitment to that, and he hasn't let me down. He hasn't let the Jewish community down, and it is right that both of them have been suspended. In terms of the vetting procedure, look, my understanding that this was a private meeting, not a Labour Party meeting, and that the recording was released much later. Obviously, if we had known about these things, we would have taken action sooner. We can't see everything everywhere, but when we do see evidence of anti-Semitism, we act swiftly to ensure the highest standards, and rightly so, amongst our MPs and amongst our parliamentary candidates. Thank you very much for coming along this morning and for your questions.